oil and gas, heating oil and products, price is determined in markets. Producers and consumers follow that market. That's the exchange market, New York, from Singapore, around the world. But investors and speculators began to see that there is a new vulnerability to oil, and it came from the war in Iraq and the geopolitics of the Middle East and from natural disaster, and they began to invest and speculate in oil, driving the price up from 2005 to 2006. Now, just as a footnote, because another time we'll talk about the climate change as a climate change crisis or a crisis of climate, in contrast to an energy supply crisis. The two are different, but often get essentially one penetrates the other and leads to some conclusions. But the interesting part of that was the belief of speculators that the climatologists who follow climate change was the prediction in Colorado from one institute. There would be 7 superstorms last summer of the Katrina class, and none occurred. And gradually, the prices of oil on that exchange, gas, fell from the high of 78, as you know, to the low of 50, and now we're in the middle. This shows some uncertainty and unpredictability about those scenarios. But that is a digression, and I want to get back to shale. The resource is not responsible for price or technology. The resource is there. The resource is feasible. Around it is a technology change, and around that is always price. Why hasn't that Colorado shale been on market, and where would we be today if it had been, is a function outside the resource itself and the recovery and the technology and the process to make it into oil. It is a function of policy and price. There's a silence today about this that I want to call your attention to. Those of you who are familiar with the Energy Policy Act of 2005 can turn to Section 369. 369 called upon the administration and the agencies, the DOE, to produce a report to commercialize, make decisions to commercialize oil shale in the United States, to recognize it as a strategic fuel. And that 369 report was mandated by Congress, and it was due 60 days ago. It's still there. It has not yet been addressed and signed off and sent to the Congress because it contains incentives that are needed still to develop the shale in Colorado, oil shale. Those incentives are quite obvious. There's a market risk in shale, as I said, because of the price over the last 90 years and the episodic way shale has been handled by the world market. So market reduction risk is in the DOE potential recommendation, and that means it translates into production price credits and so forth, tax credits, and possibly one other item, which I'm going to mention, streamlining permitting. That's important, consolidating the acreage allowable to an investor, a whole range of recommendations pending release of that report. Go to the Energy Act, you'll see in Section 369 what was mandated about shale and why it is still silent. In other words, nothing out there. In terms of the report and the shale element in it, there is a interesting part. It put into U.S. law a partnership with Alberta. It exists that Alberta, which is the major world producer of tar sands, going from practically zero to almost over a million barrels a day, a major exporter to the United States, has been a success story. The conversion of tar sands through natural gas and steam injection have produced oil. And those reserves in Alberta are now classified officially, Oil and Gas Journal, as real reserves, not resources. They've moved to reserves. That exists in U.S. legislation, in law, to form those partnerships. So as the President leaves Washington this afternoon to go to Brazil to sign a well-publicized agreement on Brazil's sugar conversion to ethanol, why not add to that an agreement under Section 369 of the EPAC 2005, an agreement with the Brazilian government to co-develop, share technology and information, Brazilian oil shale. The United States has 1.3 billion barrels. Number 2 in the world is Brazil, with 90 billion barrels. 90 billion barrels, and the geopolitics of Brazil starting to develop 90 billion barrels of oil shale, in addition to its own conventional petroleum, will change foreign policy, price, import dependence, and so on. So why not a second agreement on oil shale? Brazil has done work on oil shale, but it has done work in the pre-1970s format with reclamation problems. Now, why am I optimistic about shale in 2007? It's been 25 years since it shut down the colony development in Colorado. What is available in terms of technology that changes the perspective of shale? Why should we not call shale now an official strategic fuel potential in the United States? And why not commercially develop it in the most aggressive way? Well, the technology issue is moving rather well in terms of progress. For example, one major development is Shell Oil. Shell has established some leadership. It has been in Colorado for 30 years. It has invested in terms of R&D a significant amount of its own revenues, and it is moving toward commercialization. Shell has a BLM lease, a Bureau of Land Management lease it's working with. It's an R&D lease, and it's moving stage by stage to prove up and resolve all the issues around extraction of shale. A unique process. It's called the in situ conversion process. That's their patented technology, ICP. Simple conversion. Instead of the visualization that you have to retort, heat, and dispose of shale rock in a sort of an industrial surface kind of scenario, Shell is going underground. The refinery for shale, if Shell succeeds, will be underground. Nothing will be on the surface. Surface impact minimal, almost zero. This is a tremendous change in technological capability to do that. And it makes shale accessible. Shell is confident that it can develop that shale, its own, at this point, BLM cooperation, at prices around $25 a barrel. And with oil now between 50 and 78, this is a margin, a secure margin at this point of doing business, of producing oil in Colorado from shale. Older studies have always said that, again, using the 1970s scenario, that you would have to go on top of the ground and you would have enormous problems, as I said, in reclamation. And water use in the older studies was 3 barrels, as I said, of water